So I posed these questions on my private Facebook. So here's the first one. Is there any way of writing an online dating profile that won't attract narcissists? But what
I
would you
love this
say, Gina?
question, by the way. It's, yeah.
It
Oh,
is a good
wow.
question.
Well, and I mentioned that I unknowingly married someone that had addiction and depression issues. And that's the tip of the iceberg. That's the thing I can point to and be like, okay, there's more below the surface. But when I was in recovery, as a partner of someone struggling with addiction, one of the books the therapist handed to me in time was called The Wizard of Oz and Other Narcissists. And I thought I was in as a partner who had experienced betrayal trauma and was healing from that. And as I started reading that book, I mean, I was underlying, and it was another piece of the puzzle. It was more language that gave me words to attach to my experience. And but it was also this sinking feeling of like, oh my gosh, like this is part of what's happened, is he has narcissistic traits. And so I have come to understand the impact of that narcissistic abuse that I experienced in my marriage. And then I've had to wrestle with, do I attract narcissists? Because in the dating world, in the dating market, I mean, that has happened again. I've also experienced in my employment, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something. This is where I am today in this journey. And of course, there's no arriving ever, but I am on a path of trying to make sense of things and learn and avoid. I mean, I think that question comes from this sense of like, if I can avoid pain and tragedy, I want to do that. And I totally get that. One thing to know, like working at the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and what I get to learn as an employee there is that people don't always show their cards. Like the reason people get into abusive relationships or get taken advantage of is because the abusive person doesn't often show you that side of them. It is a hidden thing. So the deception piece, we have to remember that when someone's deceiving us, they're deceiving us. And there's nothing we can do. It's a sad thing to encounter. And I hate that exists in the world, that there are people that are deceptive. The other thing is there are predators, and those of us that are trusting and naive are prey to predators. I mean, they sniff it out. And I think they'll sniff out someone, they see the vulnerable, just like in the animal kingdom. I mean, they know it, and it is a vulnerability to be a single woman with children post-divorce. And I have felt that very strongly. And I think some people in the dating market, they know that you're lonely. They know that you want to hear certain things like, I'm here for you and you're not alone anymore. And it's okay that you have 4 children. And these are things I was told by somebody that I met on Christian Mingle that ended up being the most disastrous experience of my dating history the last 5 years. Is he knew what to say, and he would pray for me. Like he paid attention to who I was, and it was calculated. He was trying to hook me, and he knew how to do it. So I learned the term love bombing after that experience. As I turned to people that are psychologists and stuff, I was like, what is this? What just happened to me? And he showered me with love and attention. And I had to, part of what I've learned after that is, first of all, this whole thing about learning to trust our gut. In those situations, there's usually always these moments where something's off. And the more we learn to walk away despite all the good things, but when something is alerting us, like that is part of our learning to not date a narcissist again, and not being too trusting. I mean, really letting people prove themselves and giving it patience and time, not getting overly eager or believing. And I think that's some of us that have been in the dating market for a while, you get a little more jaded through these experiences. You're like, okay, I've needed enough of these now to where I'm like, we'll see. Like, I'm not overly hopeful
Yeah,
with
I hear
any
all
one
the
person.
promises, but we'll see if you really come through, if you really have the character. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, but I think something I've also said with dating and trying to prevent like dating another narcissist is the the more we can trust ourselves, like the more confident and grounded we get in the fact that we will discover this, we will be able to discern, as we get to know ourselves and grow and fall down and get back up. We can trust ourselves more. So like, even though I had that terrible dating experience, it lasted 5 months and I saw it and I ended it. And, he went out to slander me afterwards because he was a vindictive, nasty, gnarly person. And, I wish I could have spared myself and others from that experience. But I look back and I'm like, you know what? It took me 5 months instead of 15 years to get out this time and to spot it. So it was progress. And he was deceptive. And I can't fault myself always, so it's this both and I think I have the trust now in myself that I will spot it. May take me, a few days or something, but I will not get into another destructive relationship again, because I have invested the time in learning and I have good girlfriends and I have the support, you know what I mean? So
Yep, I sure do.
yeah.
So I completely identify with this story because I've had two really bad bosses in my life, two narcissistic bosses. And the first one I stayed with for a couple of years, and the second one I got out, within about 9 months. And
Yeah.
I said to myself, I am doing so much better now.
Exactly.
Now I can nail them much faster and I can walk away faster. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things we have to pride ourselves on, that we can reject these guys faster than we did the last guy. And I think that's a lot to be, we can be proud of ourselves for doing that.
Well, I think that's just to tie back into the church and our upbringing in it. I think somehow we get a message that we're superhuman when we're Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is, we're human, and this is part of how we learn, and just being gentle on ourselves. We're not perfect. And I think that's where I've learned a lot about grace outside of the church, honestly, in my recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And God doesn't magically protect us from the next narcissist.
Right.
The online dating world is just full of, you can assume that probably 50 to 70% of the people out there are just not safe for one reason or another. Maybe they wish they were safe. Maybe they think they're safe, but they're not safe enough for us. So let me go back and give this first person a straightforward answer. Is there any way of writing an online dating profile that won't attract dangerous people? No, because they're looking for someone nice, Christian, loving, and caring. And so you can assume that probably 70 or 80% of people who respond to you are no good. And probably of the remainder, some of those may still not be right for you. So it's part of this is genuinely a numbers game, because by the time, I'm a little older than you are, Gina, but by the time you're 50, by your 50s, most people have married. And if you're going to divorce, most people have already divorced by age 50. So the marketplace at age 50, going downhill from the 40s into the 50s and 60s, is the pool of candidates is really getting worse and worse. And so you just need to be aware of that. That's not to say there aren't great people out there. My best friend found a wonderful man out there, and several of my good friends have. So, but they were also super cautious. So number 2, guidelines on safe dating when you've gotten acquainted maybe online first, In other words, they're not part of your circle at church, but let's say they are part of your circle at church. I mean, the obvious things that they even say on the dating site are, make sure you meet in public, make sure that your friends are checking on you, you make sure it's a short first date, maybe just over coffee, not at night. Make sure that you've kind of vetted them a little bit with questions. I mean, the first question I always ask is, are you legally divorced? Because I found tons of married guys online, and they had no problem dating, and I'm not even sure that they had ever filed for divorce. I think maybe they were just cheaters. So, and then of course, Googling people is always helpful. But what have you found, Gina?
Well, that's great. You just covered a lot of good advice. For sure, the dating market is full of all kinds of people. And you're right, not everyone's in the dating market for the same reasons. And that's quite a wake-up call too, because I think you can go in with certain assumptions or think that others are there for the same reasons you are, and that is not the case. And so, like you said, it's weeding through that process, whether it's on an online platform or in person. I find that what I want to get to is being around that person with other people, like not just the one-on-ones, but it's like, am I going to be around people from your workplace? Am I going to get to meet some friends? Am I going to get to see some family? And of course, that doesn't come right away, but if you set it up to where those one-on-one dates are, stay in public, and then there's others that keep coming around, because again, I think the predators, they want to get you one-on-one. And they're more, controlling and manipulative and that kind of thing. Isolation is a tactic that's used in power and control relationships. So I would say keep it in a way, or try to, see, like test the waters, even like invite them to an event. I mean, that's something I use, be like, well, how are they going to react if I'm like, hey, I want you to meet a friend? And if they're too squeamish about that, then that to me is a sign too of like, then why are you here? Like, why? Of course, friends and family and coworkers are some of the most important people to me. And I feel like it's an honor when I'm invited into that from someone else. It says that is a sign that like, I'm interested in you. I'm willing to show up with you, and to see, to have you meet people close to me. Because if they're playing games, they're not going to want you to have any access. They're not going to want you to know where they live, where they work, anything like that. So
right. Anytime you can't get basic information on them, that's a real danger sign. Let's jump into this one. How quickly, this is another question from someone on my Facebook private group. How quickly do you lay your cards on the table? Would you ever say, don't waste my time if you're not, or if you are, or, and so what would your answer be to that?
Oh, this is a good one too. And I have two different thoughts that might be conflicting, but one thing is that sometimes laying your cards out there, like, and I've seen this play out in my own experiences. Like, I know ultimately I am wired for marriage. Like, I want a partner. I want my person, and that's why I think we long for these relationships too, is there's just isn't anything else like it. No family member or friend even is that day in, day out, every morning, how are you? Good morning. I want to hear about your day. I mean, when you have a significant other, they're that person. And so sometimes I've put that out there of like, yeah, like I know I want a relationship. I want marriage someday. And depending on the timing, you don't want to put that out there too fast, because it can be scary to someone in the dating market. I think, like I said, people are there for different reasons. They're coming out of hard situations just like we are. Sometimes people don't know, like they just want a low pressure situation, and pressure can send men running in the opposite direction. So just be sensitive to that. Like, be willing, I think, to be a friendship, to grow a relationship, and to let it maybe happen in a way that is different. But yeah, so I was saying, careful with that. But then on the other hand, like, I think sometimes there's a time and a place to show your cards and just be like, look, I don't want I've had enough BS in my life. I'm not going to tolerate lies. I'm not going to tolerate cheating. Like, sometimes just putting that out there can be really helpful too, to be like, this is who I am. I'm a strong woman. I know what I want. So let's not waste each other's time.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I think if you are marriage minded, it's good to say, my intention is to have friendships here, but ultimately my long-term goal is to, remarry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have any problem putting some cards out on the table. I
Mm-hmm.
think ethically, some people who have long-term issues do need to probably say something by the first or second date. If you definitely, if marriage is not in the cards for you, you definitely don't want that. Or if you are asexual, I think you have an obligation to say something
Right.
to
Yeah.
another person. Or I'm trying to think, if you have a disability, or if you have a disabled child who lives with you and that's going to be lifelong,
Mhm.
that's got to be out there really, really early. But
But I wouldn't
otherwise,
put it in a dating profile. There is a place, like, you do want to be seen for who you are and not let some of those things define you, or
mhm,
give someone the opportunity to swipe whichever direction
right,
discards you too
right,
early. Yeah. Because I'm like, give it a chance to be seen and known, and then give pieces of information in the
yeah,
course of dating.
yeah. I mean, and you can test things out. Okay, so oh, let me just say one more thing. So one woman suggested, well, can I just put on my dating profile, don't waste my time if you're not able to be faithful? And I went back and forth on this. I mean, on one hand, maybe that would be a good thing to put on your profile. But on the other hand, I think that people who aren't ethical don't take themselves off the market. They look at that as a challenge. They don't take that as a stop sign. And
Mm-hmm.
so they might go, oh, well, I think I can get past her defenses on this one. So um, I think if the goal is to protect yourself, I'm not sure that's going to protect you. If the goal is to say, here's what my values are, that's something different. But do expect predators so again, those 7 or 8 out of 10, do expect them to go for it anyway, because they're gonna now it's a challenge. Now they're gonna see if they can con you.
I agree.
Uh,
Well, and
so
one benefit of the some of the dating apps, and is that they have you choose what your goal in a relationship is. So, some people say, I'm looking for something casual. Other people say, I'm looking for an LTR, a long-term relationship. And that's some of the beauty of dating profiles, is like, right up front, you answer the questions, what you know what each of you ultimately want, and you should take that at face value. And if somebody fills out a profile when they don't answer the questions, I usually don't consider them. I'm like, if you're not that invested in at least this simple little app, that you're not having to spend a lot of time, but if you're not thoughtful about your dating profile and give me the information, then I take that as a sign that they're not someone that I personally like. If I'm looking for something significant, I want them to be invested in the process. But that's a way to kind of, without saying something so overtly, to at least just pay attention to those answers that are already embedded in a dating app.
yeah, absolutely. So now here's one I'm not sure how to answer, but I'm going to give it a stab.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you're a sexual abuse survivor, how do you find someone who's willing to roll with that? And let's see. So my response is that sexuality and your appetite for sexuality and how you want your sexuality is absolutely fair game to discuss as you get further into the dating relationship. And maybe not, the first couple of dates or anything like that, but
Mhm.
I really do think that once the relationship looks like it's becoming a little bit more serious, third, fourth, fifth date, I think it's really good to start having discussions about sexuality. And, you need to be clear about eventually, and it may not be right up front. And I say this because when I dated my husband, I felt that I really wanted some answers. And that was, what kind of sex, how often, what in your mind is a positive experience? Because as a young woman, I had always, I being a baby boomer, I had already married and had children and divorced before I kissed dating goodbye. That book was ever released. So in
Wow.
my generation, a lot of us were really looking forward to a great sex life because we hadn't been poisoned by purity culture messages. So I asked all those questions right up front and expected to have, open answers. And I think that's
Mhm.
really important to have those kinds of questions. And for the people who are the sexual abuse survivors, I wrote down a couple of notes. You know, you need to be clear about what you expect from that person and what you can and cannot accept. Now, a great relationship, let's face it, really can be really healing. But it's not a substitute for really good therapy. And if this has been a big part of your life, sexual trauma, boy, you need a trauma-informed therapist
Mhm.
and really work on yourself. And don't expect a romantic relationship to fix you in this area or to make up for all the losses that went in the past. What do you think?
Well said. I'm glad you covered everything you did. When you first asked the question, the first thing that came into my mind too was around trauma, because whether it's sexual abuse or some other form of trauma, at the heart of it, that's what it is. And they say, with all of us that have experienced trauma, the question others need to ask is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And so if we're dating someone, I think a healthy sign is that that's their posture towards us, is not, oh, there's something wrong with you, but this curiosity of something's happened and there's a story behind that, and there's going to be certain things that are triggering. And like you said, it will be near impossible to get through unless that individual has done their own work. And thankfully, like, trauma counselors are around, and there's all these modalities now that help us resolve trauma and heal from trauma. And we can invite our significant other into that process, of what we're learning and healing from. But they need that sensitivity that we're a trauma survivor and what that means, that there are going to be things that are triggering, and handling that with care and holding space for us is super important. But I would say just lean into the education and the resources that are there, like all of these topics, these things we've been through. I mean, there are specialists, there are resources, there are support groups. Oftentimes we just don't know that they exist. So going to a point of contact like you or me, like, we're aware of people and resources, and we can help guide and direct.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, here's another one. How do we learn to see the red flags and address them rather than making excuses for them, ignoring the red flags, disregarding our instincts? And how do we learn to run? So, I'm going to go first on this because I've had a little bit of time to think about this
Okay.
one. But for me, even in the business world, let's not even talk about dating.
Mm-hmm.
Just learning, just having a list of emotional abuse examples.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a list, I've got 150 abuse examples in my book, emotional abuse examples, and spiritual and physical. And they're oftentimes things you wouldn't expect. If no one had told you that that is a common method of manipulation, you'd never know, because normal people, do push back and, do say the same things. But abusers have a pattern of using emotional abuse over and over and over again until you're so confused and so turned inside out, you don't know which way is up. So for me, both in dating and in the work world, I just think it's really valuable to memorize or to go over a list of emotional abuse examples, maybe once a week during the time that you're dating, because it'll make it much easier for you to catch on to abusers. You learn how they minimize, how they tell you, oh, you didn't hear it right.
Right.
Or, oh, that's not what I meant, or I was just being sarcastic, or can't you take a joke? And these are all clues that you're being played, that this person is manipulating you. And so I really, really like, if you're not aware of what their tactics are, you won't see them coming. And it's the awareness of the tactics and how they make you feel that will reinvigorate your instincts. We were all born with the instinct to run to safety, but through childhood trauma or through early relationships, these instincts get disabled. And sometimes through our own religious messages that we are given, that, it's not nice to reject a person. It's not nice to not forgive them. It's not nice to ghost a person. It's not nice to run away. It's not nice to reject a man who's an honorable man who's reached out to you. Well, when it comes to our own safety, we don't really need to be nice. And that's why I really love all kinds of online things, whether it be Twitter or Facebook. Learn to block people and feel no guilt. Because when you can start blocking people and defriending people and not responding to a friend request and feel no guilt, your boundaries are starting to come in. You're starting to listen to your instincts. You're starting to listen for danger. You're starting to listen to that gut. And that is a really good sign when you're blocking and defriending and not accepting friend requests.
I echo listen to your instincts. And that is a process of learning what that looks like, because the tricky thing is not everything's always a red flag. Sometimes it's yellow, orange. You're just do I need to wait till it gets red? And sometimes that, like, I know in my own life, I think I want to be able to like confirm to myself and have a more concrete reason for walking away or having a boundary. And sometimes it's that, waiting and staying in it that ends up getting more and more destructive and unhealthy, instead of allowing, sometimes that yellow light was enough. It doesn't need to be blaring red. So I'm glad you said, listen to your instincts. I also want to say, it's like, sometimes I think when we talk about people that are abusive or manipulating or something, it's not this all or nothing thing. Like, it's not like there's usually two sides of a person, and this is where it gets hard, because they have usually some really great, charming, wonderful, attractive qualities. And that's what, but then you have this experience of this other side, or these things that aren't setting right or that alarm you. And it's trying to reconcile that. And I think that might be the thing that could tip you off to a concern, is if you're reconciling, you're like, well, there's this, but there's this. And that back and forth of like trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. It's like, if there's a lack of character in some area, or repeated, thing in your gut that's like, something's off, not right. Like, even if there's all that good stuff, let that be enough that they can be great in some ways, but like, it's never going to be just all or nothing.
Right. And we do need to ask some really good questions. I mean, I experienced this. So I remarried 3 years ago and got a really great guy. And, but we had a moment early in our dating relationship that I just about walked away because I tell this story from time to time. So we were at his daughter's house, and his elderly mother was with us, and she was struggling to walk down from the second floor of the apartment down to the ground floor. And just each painful step, hanging on to the railing. And I'm looking at the man I'm dating, and he's not leaping into action. He's not running, racing up those stairs to take her purse or to help her down the stairs. And I am getting mad, and I'm getting really upset. And I went and talked to my counselor about that. I said, I'm done. I'm done with this relationship. This man isn't caring. He's not loving. He watched, he stood there and watched as his elderly mother struggled her way down the steps. And my counselor said something really interesting. He said, that may be true. You may be dating someone who's an uncaring, ogre, but it's worth exploring that a little bit with him. And so he said, this is what you should say. You should say, hey, I want to ask you about last Sunday when we were at your mother's house and your mother was coming down the steps. And in my family, the appropriate thing to do would have been for me to race up those steps, to offer my mother my arm, and help her down the steps. That would have been the loving, kind, and expected thing to do in my family. Tell me how your family deals with things like this. And he said, oh, I see what you're asking me. My mother was a professional dancer, and my mother is very embarrassed that she is struggling so much in walking. And for me to preemptively jump in and help her before she had asked for help would have been insulting to her. It would have said, Mom, I know you're trying, but you're just not good enough at walking. So let me help you. And he said, I was right there. The instant she asked for help, I would have jumped in and offered her my arm. But I wanted to give her the agency to ask me instead of taking away her agency and just grabbing her arm. And I thought, oh, wow, that was not the answer I was expecting. What I've discovered is instead of dating somebody who's really insensitive and who's an ogre and really mean to his mom, I'm dating someone who has high emotional intelligence, who is really caring and knows his mother and cares about her feelings. And I'm so glad I asked that question. I'm so glad my counselor asked me to really push on him and say, what's the difference between, the way you were brought up and the way I was brought up? So that's just my little story about that kind of thing.
I'm so glad you told that story, because you're right, of like, this is part of the dilemma of dating, and part of the, I think the growth of learning how to navigate this crazy thing called dating is like how to pay attention to your gut, how to look for warning, but then also not to make assumptions and not to be too quick to write people off and realize, we've got baggage, we're carrying baggage, we can be really reactive out of our own trauma. And continuing to, like you said, you had a therapist, like working on ourselves and not just looking to the dating relationship to solve issues, but like being in a constant place of personal growth, and then using the dating experience to watch ourselves show up differently. Like I see it as a way to practice. Like I get to learn each time, and I get opportunity to try differently and to grow in my communication skills, because like we've all heard, communication is so essential to a healthy relationship, no matter what topic you're talking about. And so, giving someone the benefit of the doubt, seeing how they do with difficult conversations is part of, I think, getting to a healthy relationship.
So I'm going to throw this in here. Another technique my counselor taught me is when you hear something, say, can I check something out with you? So first you ask their permission. When you said this, I interpreted that to mean that you fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth aspect of this is that what you meant? And then let them explain it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can find out later, do their words match their actions or not? But at least it shows the person that you're going to ask questions when something doesn't look right. And I think that's really, really important.